You think you know the story of Lazarus? But what if I told you there's a secret to this story that has been hidden for centuries? A detail that's not just about a man who came back to life, but about you, about the times we live in, and about something that's about to happen. Lazarus isn't just a character in the Bible, he is a signal, a warning. And when you understand what really happened that day, you'll realize that this miracle is a direct message to your heart and perhaps to someone you love who is still trapped in an invisible tomb. But before we delve into that mystery, I need to tell you something. This message needs to get far and wide. Because if Lazarus represents more than a resurrected man, then it means there are Lazaruses everywhere. People breathing, walking, but still trapped inside. And maybe you know someone like that. Maybe it's you. So, be part of this mission now. Click subscribe and activate the bell knot to follow another channel. But so you can receive revelations like this before it's too late. And leave your like now, because each like is like removing a stone from in front of a tomb. It opens the way for this word to find and free lives that are now hidden in darkness. In the next few minutes, you will see this story like you have never seen it before. You will understand why Jesus delayed on purpose, why he wept before he acted, and why this is the only miracle that echoes as a warning for the last days. Get ready, because what you're about to hear will forever change the way you view life, death, and the power that exists between them. It was morning in Bethany, and the sun, still shy, cast golden rays over the hills. But in that house where laughter and conversation had once echoed, the air was heavy. The scent of medicinal herbs mingled with the scent of oil poured over the pale skin of a motionless man. Lazarus, Jesus' close friend. Mary, sitting beside the bed, held her brother's cold hand. Her red eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Martha, more practical, came and went, wetting cloths, checking his breathing, trying to hide her fear. Between them, a silent look said, "He won't make it." And then, with an urgent gesture, Martha turned to a young servant. "Go, run to where Jesus is. Tell him, the one whom the Lord loves is sick." The messenger didn't hesitate. He tightened his belt, pulled on his cloak, and ran down the dusty road. Hours later, the man encounters Jesus and his disciples. Breathless, he delivers the message. The disciples look at each other. They expect Jesus to rise immediately. But the Master simply looks up to heaven and says, in a calm voice, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son may be glorified through it." But he does not move, not a step. The disciples are restless. The messenger, confused, waits for an order. Nothing. Jesus remains where he is, as if time were his servant and not the other way around. Meanwhile, in Bethany, Lazarus' condition worsens. The day drags on. The nights grow colder. Mary and Martha, increasingly desperate, look out the window, hoping to see Jesus appearing on the horizon. But they see only silence. Then the inevitable happens, the last breath. A fragile sound like the extinguishing of a flame. Mary covers her face with her hands. Martha, strong on the outside, breaks down on the inside. The women's weeping fills the house. Neighbors gather. A body is washed, anointed, and wrapped in linen cloths. In Jewish custom, the burial is quick. Lazarus is taken to a cave carved into the rock. A heavy stone is rolled to close the entrance, and there, the silence becomes absolute. From afar, friends and neighbors whisper, "Where is Jesus? Wasn't he so close? They said he healed the blind. Why didn't he heal his own friend?" The words cut like blades. Mary retreats. Martha tries to stay active, organizing visits, receiving complaints. But inside, the question echoes, why didn't he come? Elsewhere, Jesus looks at his disciples and says, "Our friend Lazarus fell asleep." They, without understanding, respond, "Sir, if he sleeps, he will get better." Then Jesus speaks clearly. "Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, so you may believe, I'm glad I wasn't there. But let's go to him." An awkward silence hangs over the disciples. They don't understand. How can a delay be a reason for joy? How can the death of a friend be part of something bigger? As Jesus approaches Bethany, mourning continues in the village. Friends take turns comforting Mary and Martha. Some recall past miracles and wonder why, this time, heaven seems silent. Others, more cynical, conclude that Jesus simply didn't care that much. But what no one knows is that delay isn't carelessness, it's strategy. The sky sometimes seems to move slowly, but every step is calculated. The miracle that is about to happen would not have been possible on the first day, nor on the second, nor on the third. Only on the fourth day, when all human hope was dead and buried. And this is where the story changes tone. Because in the next moment, we will see that death is not the end, and that Jesus' absence is not a sign of abandonment, but the prelude to something that will shake the world. The stone has been placed, the tomb is closed, and with it, something inside Mary and Martha also closed. The first days after a death are always the heaviest. In Jewish tradition, mourning was marked by 7 intense days. Kalat Shiva, where friends and relatives took turns consoling the family. The house filled with people, hugs, and tears. But it was also filled with questions, and a silence even more painful than words. Mary remained seated on the floor most of the time, a sign of deep mourning. Her gaze was lost, as if searching for Jesus in some invisible distance. Martha, always practical, tried to care for people, to maintain order. But when she entered her brother's empty room, the hardness of her expression melted, and she hunched over, letting the tears flow unobserved. Outside, conversations were inevitable. He healed an officer's son who was miles away. Why didn't he do the same for Lazarus? Maybe you didn't get the message. Maybe you don't care that much. Those words pierced the walls like arrows. Martha pretended not to hear, but each sentence found its target. Mary simply didn't respond. Jesus' absence wasn't just physical, it was emotional. On the second day, the silence began to suffocate. There were no longer enough tears to express the pain. The air felt heavier. Some friends began returning home. Others stayed, keeping the atmosphere charged with memories. By the third day, hope for any possibility of a miracle had completely dissipated. According to Jewish belief, a person's soul remained close to the body for 3 days, hoping to return. By the fourth day, there was no return. The body was already decomposing. The stench of death became impossible to ignore. And it was on this third day that Martha went out into the courtyard, looked at the horizon, and saw nothing. The road to Jerusalem was empty. No dust stirred by hurried footsteps, no familiar silhouettes. Mary, on the other side of the house, still held the sound of Jesus' voice in her memory. She mentally replayed stories of miracles, each one like a spark of light. But now they were extinguished by the cold reality of the tomb. Jesus' silence screamed louder than any words. It was a silence that seemed to say, "I won't come, not this time." But what no one realized is that that silence was not absence. It was preparation. Heaven does not respond to despair with haste, but with perfection. There was something afoot that could not have been anticipated. Human time and God's time rarely go hand in hand. But when they do, the impossible happens. On the fourth day, before sunrise, Martha got up earlier than everyone else. She didn't know why. There was an uneasiness in her spirit, a feeling that something was moving in the unseen. As she set out to fetch water, she looked back at the road, and this time, there it was. A small cloud of dust on the horizon. Footsteps, they weren't steps of mourning, they were steps of purpose. Jesus was coming, but he did not come running, nor out of breath, like someone who arrived late. He walked with the firmness of someone who arrives at exactly the right moment. Each step was deliberate, carrying a weight only he understood. Martha stood still for a few seconds, as if trying to believe what she was seeing. Then her body reacted before her mind. She dropped her water jar, pulled up her cloak, and began walking quickly toward the road. She didn't want him to reach the house. She didn't want the whole village to witness this encounter. Mary remained seated, still unaware that the Master was approaching. The silence was about to be broken. But before the words were spoken, there was something that only that silence could teach. That sometimes God loves us enough to delay, and that waiting is not punishment, but the setting for a miracle greater than we could ask for. Martha did not stop walking until the distance between her and Jesus was short enough for his eyes to meet hers. But when the look happened, time seemed to stop. Martha's eyes were red, marked by pain. But behind the dried tear was a mixture of faith and frustration. She could uncontain the accusation she had been carrying in her chest since her brother's last breath. "Lord, if you were here, my brother wouldn't have died." The sentence fell between them like a stone to the ground. It was both a lament and a confession of faith. Martha believed in Jesus' power, but she also felt the weight of his delay. Jesus didn't look away. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain himself. Instead, he responded with a statement that would span the centuries. "Your brother will rise again." Martha took a deep breath. She knew the scriptures. She knew about the resurrection on the last day. And almost automatically, she answered, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." But Jesus stepped forward. The intensity of his voice seemed to tear open reality itself. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe that? Martha felt a shiver run through her body. It wasn't just a promise for the future, it was a revelation for the present. Jesus was not saying the tone to Thyr would be a resurrection. He was saying that themself was the resurrection there, in that moment. "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." Upon arriving, Martha approaches Mary, who is still sitting on the ground. She leans over and says softly, "The Master is here, and he is calling you." Maria slowly raises her head. That phrase, "he's calling you," sparked something inside her that not even grief could extinguish. She jumps up, adjusts her cloak, and hurries out. Those comforting Mary thought she was going to the tomb to weep, and they decided to follow her. But unbeknownst to them, they were being led to witness the impossible. Upon seeing Jesus, Mary could no longer contain her grief. She fell at his feet, weeping. Her words were almost identical to those of her sister. "Lord, if you were here, my brother wouldn't have died." But this time, the scene is different. Jesus doesn't answer right away. He looks at Mary, sees her tears, and looks around at all the people weeping. And then, he is deeply moved. "Where did they put him?" he asked. They replied, "Sir, come and see." And there, on the way to the grave, the impossible happens. Jesus weeps. These are not tears of helplessness. They are tears of love. The Creator cries for his friend, who will be resurrected in minutes. The Lord of life is moved by the pain of those who suffer, even knowing that the end will be victory. But others comment with a certain critical tone. "He opened the blind man's eyes. Couldn't he have prevented him from dying?" Jesus keeps walking, but something inside him moves like a tide about to overflow. The tension grows. Each step toward the tomb is a step toward the climax. The group reaches the cave entrance. The stone is in place. The air is thick. The smell of death begins to creep in. Jesus stops before the stone, staring at it, as if facing not just a physical barrier, but a symbol of what is about to be broken. The wind blowing over Bethany seemed to carry an invisible weight. Every leaf that fell to the ground, every soft rustle of the olive trees, sounded like an announcement of something about to happen. The murmur of the people around him turned into a reverent, almost suffocating silence. It was as if all creation were holding its breath, waiting. Jesus approaches the entrance to the tomb. The cold stones and the smell of death are almost palpable in the air. He pauses for a moment before the great rock that seals the tomb. His eyes are fixed, not on what can be seen, but on what only he can see. Mary and Martha, side by side, look at each other. Their hearts beat fast. Jesus' words still echo in them. If you believe, you will see the glory of God. It's an impossible promise, a shock to all human logic. And yet, something in his voice, something in his presence, made one believe the impossible was about to happen. With a firm tone that cuts through the silence like a sword, Jesus says, "Take away the stone." A murmur of astonishment runs through the crowd. Some back away, others approach, curious and restless. Martha, wide-eyed, hesitates. "Sir, he's been dead for 4 days now. ... The smell." Jesus' answer is a thunderclap in the form of words. "Didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Men approach, their hands trembling on the rough surface of the rock. The creaking of the rolling stone resonates like an ancient echo. Every inch revealed is a step closer to the mystery. The strong smell permeates the air, and some cover their faces, others retreat. But Jesus does not look away. He raises his eyes to the heavens. His voice, soft at first, grows louder as if speaking directly to the heart of the universe. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I say this for the sake of the people standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." And then, he turns his face to the darkness of the tomb. His feet firmly stand on the earth, his voice filled with an authority that transcends matter, time, and death itself. And then, "Lazarus, come out." It's not a request, it's not a plea, it's an absolute order, like someone commanding light to exist or the sea to calm. A command that cannot be ignored, not even by death itself. The silence after the cry is unbearable. The wind stops. The birds fall silent. Even hearts seem to beat slower. All eyes are fixed on the darkness of the cave. And then, a sound. A slow shuffling, a stumble. A second sound. A murmur of astonishment runs through the crowd. The shadow of a figure moves within. The impossible materializes before them. Lazarus appears at the entrance to the tomb, wrapped in swaddling clothes, his face covered by the shroud. His steps are heavy but firm. His eyes, still hidden, seem to seek the light. The shock turns to screams of astonishment, to tears of disbelief. Some fall to their knees, others recoil, as if faced with something their minds cannot process. Mary covers her mouth, her entire body trembling. Martha lets out a sob that mixes fear and joy. Jesus looks at him and, with a simple gesture, says, "Take off his bandages and let him go." The sound of hasty hands undoing the fabric echoes like the untying of a promise. And when Lazarus's face is finally uncovered, his eyes meet Jesus's. It's a look that needs no words. Look that says, "I was dead, and now I am alive because you called me." At that moment, the crowd erupts in clamor. There is no more silence, no more fear. There is weeping, there are hugs, there is disbelief transformed into faith. The air seems lighter, the wind blows again, but now it carries no weight. It carries life. And as everyone stirs, some try to touch Lazarus, others fall at Jesus' feet, understanding that they have just witnessed something that would change not only that village, but the entire history of humanity. The divine command was not just for Lazarus. It was a sign, an announcement, a silent warning that death would not have the final word. And in the hearts of those who saw it, the question begins to echo. If he can call a dead person back to life, what can he do with mine? The air felt electric. The murmur of the crowd became a roar, like waves crashing against rocks. All eyes were fixed on a single figure, now standing where before there had been only the silence of death. Lazarus was breathing, alive. His eyes blinked slowly, adjusting to the daylight, while the damp, heavy cloth covering his face dripped with water and sweat. The shock was immediate, and no one reacted the same way. Some screamed, clutching their heads. Others fell to their knees, weeping, unable to comprehend what their eyes were witnessing. And there were those who recoiled, their lips pressed together, as if they had witnessed something dangerous, something that shouldn't have happened. The return of life to Lazarus's body was not just a miracle. It was a direct affront to the established order. An act so public, so undeniable, that no argument could erase it. Because the problem wasn't that Lazarus was alive. The problem was what that meant. It's the divided reaction. Among the crowd, men in long robes and calculating gazes observed everything coldly. The Pharisees' spiritual leaders and guardians of the law saw in that moment not just a miracle, but a political and religious threat. If Jesus could call a dead man back to life, what power would he have to redefine all the rules? And, worse, how many more would follow him after this demonstration? The scandal was not in the miracle itself, but in its consequences. The resurrection of Lazarus was like throwing a giant stone into a calm lake. The ripples would spread quickly, reaching even the darkest corridors of Jerusalem. And indeed, so it happened. While some ran to tell neighboring villages what they had witnessed, others rushed to inform the authorities. And the words that echoed were simple and powerful. He called a dead man. And the dead man lives. Role reversal. There lay Lazarus, still dazed, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. Each breath was a pulsing miracle. And as Jesus ordered the bandages that bound him removed, a profound symbol unfolded. Lazarus had not only been freed from death, but also from the bonds that prevented him from walking freely. It was a prophetic image. The power of Christ not only restores life, but removes everything that still keeps one trapped in the past. And it is here that, for those who hear this story today, a cutting truth emerges often. God has already called us out of the grave, but we still walk around bandaged by the scars of yesterday. The people watched as Lazarus took a deep breath, perhaps realizing that he was at the center of something much greater than his own life. The scandal gained strength. Religious leaders could no longer ignore it. A miracle performed in broad daylight before dozens of witnesses and just a few kilometers from Jerusalem on the eve of Passover. It was a direct blow to the status quo. The secret order was soon given. We must stop him. And, if necessary, Lazarus too. Yes, Lazarus also became a target. His very existence was living proof that Jesus had authority over death and that it could not be freely circulated. It was safer to silence the testimony than to deal with its impact. And herein lies one of the most provocative lessons of this story. When God does something great in your life, don't just expect applause. The same miracle that attracts worship also stirs opposition. Between heaven and conflict, tensions spread like wildfire. On one side, surrendered hearts. On the other, secret meetings to plot. But in the midst of it all stood a man who walked serenely to Jesus. He knew that Lazarus' miracle was not an end in itself, but an arrow pointing to an even greater event, his own resurrection. Every step he took after that day brought him closer to his final destination on the cross. And perhaps, for many, this was the true scandal. Not only giving life back, but doing so knowing that it would accelerate the path to their own death. An irrefutable truth, and as the news spread through each village, one reality became impossible to erase. Someone who was dead now lived. Someone whom the grave had swallowed now walked the streets. And that someone was living proof that Jesus didn't just talk about eternal life, he delivered it. Can you imagine crossing paths with days later at the market, looking at that face and thinking, I was at your funeral, and now you're here buying bread? This kind of trial isn't debated, it's experienced. The sun was beginning to set over Bethany, tinting the sky orange and red, as if the world itself were witness to what had happened. But there was no full-blown celebration. The air was heavy, charged with expectation and tension. Lazarus's miracle had changed everything, but it had also placed everyone on the brink of inevitable conflict. Jesus walked among the crowd gathered around the tomb. His eyes roamed over each face, some filled with astonishment, others with hope, and still others with doubt. But he knew this was more than a miracle. It was a sign, a warning, a preparation for what was to come. Lazarus, now free of his bandages, still seemed dazed, like someone awakening from a deep and disturbing dream. But each step he took symbolized more than his own restored life. It represented Christ's authority over death, over fear, over hopelessness. And above all, it represented the imminence of something greater, the cross. As the disciples watched, tensions among the religious leaders grew. The Pharisees met in secret, discussing how to deal with what they saw as a threat to their influence. Jesus' every word, every act of public power, shook the foundations of a system built on fear and tradition. If we let it continue like this, one of them said, his voice trembling with anger and fear, people will follow him blindly. He not only defies the law, but also our authority. We need to stop him before the crowd becomes impossible to control. Another replied, clenching his fists. But Jesus was undaunted. Every accusatory look, every conspiratorial whisper, only reinforced the purpose of the miracle. He knew that Lazarus was not just a man brought back to life. He was a living testament that God's power could not be contained, and that the next act would require courage and faith. And it was in this scenario that Jesus turned to Lazarus and said something that few heard, but which would carry eternal significance. This sign is not just for you. It is for everyone to see that true life is not found in the absence of death, but in the presence of faith. The crowd watched, still in disbelief. Some whispered, I've never seen anything like it. Others trembled, feeling reality shift beneath their feet. But for Jesus, this was only the beginning of the foreshadowing of the cross. As night fell, Mary and Martha felt a mixture of relief and fear. Joy for their brother's life, but apprehension for what was to come. They did not yet fully understand that the miracle they had witnessed would provoke the wrath of many, and that the same power that had called Lazarus back from the dead would lead Jesus to persecution and ultimately to crucifixion. Lazarus, now conscious, looked at Jesus as if recognizing the hand that had lifted him from eternal silence. But at the same time, he realized the weight of the responsibility he carried. He was no longer just a man who had returned from the dead. He was a sign, a reminder of Christ's power that could not be ignored. And in the midst of the crowd, a young disciple whispered, Sir, all of this is true, but are people ready to understand? Jesus just smiled slightly, his eyes reflecting eternity and compassion. Preparing hearts is not always easy. But what was done here today will show that faith must be stronger than fear, and that even in the face of death, there is hope. The sign had been given. The miracle was complete. But the impact would continue to grow, silent and inexorable, until the day the cross would become the final stage for the greatest truth ever revealed. Lazarus's every step now echoed in everyone's consciousness. Every glance at Jesus carried the promise that nothing could impede the divine plan. That night, the town of Bethany was no longer the same. The world, even silently, was beginning to sense that something monumental was in motion. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, some remained close, absorbing every detail, unaware that they were about to witness not only the resurrection of a man, but the foreshadowing of an act that would change history forever. The sky was beginning to darken, tinging Bethany with shades of purple and gray. The shadows lengthened, and the silence of the night carried an almost palpable tension. The miracle of Lazarus had become news not only among the villagers, but was beginning to spread to distant regions. Those who heard the story realized something grand and incomprehensible was happening, and no one could remain indifferent. Jesus, seated beneath the olive tree that stands on the hill near the tomb, observed the commotion. His gaze penetrated the scattered crowd, but also transcended physical space. He saw beyond what human eyes could grasp. He saw hearts, intentions, fears, and hopes. Each person carried a silent decision, and the miracle served as a warning, a divine alert about the approaching last days. The miracle of Lazarus wasn't just about physical resurrection. It was a profound spiritual lesson. Death doesn't stop God's plan, and those who believe, even in the face of the impossible, are invited to live a new reality. Each witness would carry with them a fragment of this warning. And the question that echoed silently in the air was, are we ready to perceive true life even when all seems lost? The religious leaders, still furious at the exposure of Jesus' power, began to devise more dangerous strategies. They realized they could not control the truth of the miracle, but they could try to silence its effects through manipulation and intimidation. The impending conflict between genuine faith and the corrupt religious system began to emerge clearly. "This man attracts followers like no one else," whispered one Pharisee to another, "and Lazarus has become living proof of what he claims to be. If we don't act now, we will lose our authority." But Jesus remained serene. He knew that every act of opposition, every murmur of doubt, was part of a greater plan. The warning unfolding there extended beyond Bethany. It was a preparation for all to recognize true life, even in the darkest days. And it was in this setting that Jesus addressed his disciples. Using the event to reveal universal principles, Lazarus came back to life so you can understand. Faith is not just believing in the visible, but trusting in the invisible. What the world considers impossible, for God, is just the next step. And those who cling to me, even when all seems lost, will see miracles greater than they can imagine. Each word resonated with authority, touching hearts and awakening consciences. The miracle served as a prophetic sign, a reminder that eternal life does not depend on human circumstances, but on connection with divine power. And Jesus added something that few realized at the time, but which would reverberate for centuries. The world clings to what is visible, to what it can touch or measure, but the last days will not be guided by what is evident. They will be determined by what remains invisible to the eye, but alive in the heart. The crowd listened, some fascinated, others suspicious, right? But the message was clear. True faith transcends human logic. And the miracle of Lazarus was only the beginning of a greater revelation. Mary and Martha drew closer to Jesus, sensing that the miracle they witnessed was not just about Lazarus, but about each person there. Christ's presence made it clear that true life is a choicy decision to trust, even when all seems lost. And at that moment, Jesus concluded the warning. Those who understand the message of this miracle will be ready to face the challenges of the last days. But those who ignore the power of the unseen will remain captive to fear, doubt, and spiritual death. The sky, now dark, seemed to respond. A cold breeze swept through the valley, as if the whole world were witnessing a foreshadowing of what was to come. Lazarus' resurrection was not just an isolated act of compassion, but a prophetic sign, a warning to all willing to see beyond the obvious. And so, Bethany became more than a village. It became the stage for an eternal message. Every step of Lazarus, every glance of the crowd, every gesture of Jesus carried a meaning that transcended time. The miracle was a promise. Even in the darkest days, life and true faith prevail. In the heart of every spectator of that scene, the question resounded silently but intensely. Am I prepared for the signs of the last days? Am I ready to answer the call of faith, even when the impossible seems inevitable? The warning had been given. The signal had been given. And those who truly paid attention would realize that Lazarus' resurrection was only the beginning of a journey that would culminate in the greatest act of courage, love, and truth ever revealed to the world. The sun was beginning to rise over Bethany, tinting the horizon with golden and rosy hues. The air still carried the echo of the previous night murmur's footsteps and transformed hearts. The miracle of Lazarus was not just a memory, it was a living legacy that pulsed in every glance, in every breath. Martha walked through the courtyard, reflecting on everything she had witnessed. Every detail of the resurrection was still etched in her memory. The sound of the stone rolling, Jesus' steady voice, Lazarus' eyes opening to life. She understood now that there was no return to the previous state. Nothing would ever be the same again. Mary, for her part, felt the weight of the revelation in her spirit. Her tears were no longer of mourning, but of recognition. Recognition of the divine power that works even when human reason fails. Recognition that faith is not a distant concept, but a force capable of altering the course of one's existence. The legacy of Lazarus' miracles spread quickly. Each witness carried with them a story impossible to ignore. Some returned home, sharing their disbelief and hope. Others approached Jesus, yearning to learn, understand, and connect with the one who dominated life and death. But it wasn't just the faithful who were touched. The religious leaders, still shaken, began to realize they couldn't erase the proof of the impossible. Lazarus' existence was an argument that transcended theological debates, laws, and human traditions. It was a clear sign that Jesus' authority stemmed from something far greater than any earthly structure. And as the village awakened to the transformative reality of the miracle, Jesus gathered with his disciples. His every word now carried an even deeper lesson. You saw what happened. But what matters is not just seeing, but understanding. The miracle of Lazarus is a reflection of what happens when faith meets the power of God. It transforms, liberates, and challenges human limitations. The disciples listened attentively. They knew that this legacy belonged not only to Lazarus, but to all who would allow themselves to believe. Every action of Jesus in that moment was a lesson in courage, faith, and purpose. Jesus continued, "The world will be full of uncertainty. Death, fear, and doubt will try to dominate the human heart. But remember, when faith aligns with the divine, nothing is impossible. You will see signs, you will face challenges, and even so, you can be instruments of miracles." The legacy is not the miracle itself, but what it generates in those who believe. Lazarus, now fully aware of his second life, watched in silence. He understood that he was not just a restored man. He was a symbol of transformation, courage, and testimony. His life now carried responsibility to tell what he witnessed, to live in gratitude, and to continually remember that faith is the link that connects the impossible to the possible. And for everyone present, the message was clear: miracles happen. But the greatest strength lies in recognizing, living, and sharing this experience. Lazarus' miracle didn't end with him leaving the tomb. It began there, spreading hope and faith with every step. The sun now rose fully, illuminating the village and bathing faces in golden light. It was as if the universe itself confirmed it. Life always finds a way, and true faith is never in vain. Martha and Mary, side by side, watched the scene serenely. They knew that, whatever came, the legacy of the miracle would live on. Hope had been restored, and the certainty that God acts even when all seems lost now resided in their hearts. And so, the legacy of Lazarus' miracle became eternal. Not just an isolated act of power, but a call to all who wish to understand the true meaning of faith, hope, and transformation. Every eye that turns to this event understands. It's not just about coming back from death. It's about allowing God's life to flow through us, even when the impossible seems inevitable. The miracle of Lazarus reminds us that, no matter how great the pain, no matter how profound the loss, faith has the ability to break through the most rigid barriers. The call now is for every spectator to believe, to act, to live, and to allow the impossible to manifest in your own life. And as the day draws to a close, the village of Bethany stands as a silent witness to what happened, a reminder that when faith meets divine power, the impossible ceases to exist, and life becomes an eternal legacy that echoes through generations. The sky was tinged with soft twilight colors, reflecting a calm that contrasted with the intensity of recent events. But beneath that, apparent serenity. An invisible energy hovered over Bethany, an energy that carried profound lessons, signs of transformation, and the promise of an eternal legacy. Jesus walked slowly among the people who stood near Lazarus' tomb. Each step was measured, yet charged with purpose. His eyes, fixed on the disciples and those watching, conveyed more than words could express. They conveyed truth, hope, life. "You have witnessed the impossible," he said, his voice echoing with authority and compassion. "But what matters is not just seeing, but understanding. Every miracle I perform is not just to impress, but to transform." Mary and Martha approached, their eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude, reverence, and understanding. They had seen their brother called from the dead, but now they realized that the true miracle was not merely physical. It was spiritual, emotional, eternal. Lazarus was restored. Jesus continued, "But what happened here is a reflection of what each of you can experience. True faith is not limited to what is visible. It defies logic, breaks barriers, and transforms lives in ways no one can foresee." The miracle of Lazarus left a profound change in its wake. Some of those present wept silently, not just in joy, but in recognition. They recognized that if God could call a dead man back to life, He could also restore broken hearts, shattered families, and abandoned dreams. Jesus then turned to the growing crowd around him, and his voice became firmer, more penetrating. As if speaking directly to their hearts. The world clings to what it sees, to what it can touch, measure, or control. But the true power of God is revealed in what is invisible to the eye, but alive in the heart. Faith is not just believing in what we see, but trusting in what we can not see, trusting that life always finds a way when it aligns with the divine. Each word seemed to vibrate in the air, reaching each listener in a unique way. Some people felt a strength pulsate in their chests, as if a new life had been planted within them. Others, even skeptical, could not ignore the reality before their eyes. The impossible had happened. The miracle of Lazarus, Jesus continued, is more than the resurrection of a man. It is a call, a warning, a reminder that nothing can stop God's plan. Even death, hopelessness, fear, error, everything can be transformed when there is true faith. Martha, her voice breaking, asked, "Lord, how can we carry this message forward? How can we share something so great without it being lost in words?" Jesus smiled, and in that smile was the patience and wisdom of 1,000 ages. The message that transforms doesn't need to be amplified with shouts or speeches. It manifests itself in the lives of every believer. Those who experience God's power must live in such a way that others see the change. The greatest miracle is not just being saved from death, but being transformed by it. Lazarus now understood his role. He had been called from death, but his life now served as a living testimony to the power of Christ. Every gesture, every word, every action would be a reminder that true faith creates possibilities, where before there were only impossibilities. Jesus then raised his hands, and his voice became a silent, irresistible invitation. May each of you who witness this miracle understand. Life does not end at what seems like the end. Every loss, every pain, every despair is an opportunity for growth, transformation, and rebirth. Don't let fear paralyze you. Don't let the impossible intimidate you. Believe, trust, and allow God's life to flow through you. The sun was already rising fully above the horizon, illuminating the village with a warm, golden light. The resurrection of Lazarus was no longer just an event. It was a living lesson. Each witness now carried with them the responsibility to live differently, to see beyond the obvious, to transform their own lives and inspire others to do the same. Jesus concluded with a penetrating gaze that seemed to cross time. Remember, the miracles God performs are signs of what He desires to do in each life. But the true legacy is unjust in what we sit as, in the transformation that occurs when someone chooses to believe and act. If you allow this faith to flourish, nothing can stop you from experiencing miracles in your own lives. And so Bethany became the stage for an eternal truth. The resurrection of Lazarus was unjust about returning from death, but about showing that faith transforms, that hope is reborn, and that the impossible is just the next step for those who believe. Every glance at Lazarus, every breath after the night of miracles carried with it a promise. Life can always begin anew. And every spectator of that story, even centuries later, is called to reflect. What in my life needs faith to be reborn? Where does hope need to be restored? What impossible things am I ignoring that could become reality? The ultimate legacy of Lazarus' miracle is a message that transcends time. Believe in the invisible, live with courage, act with faith, and never allow death, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, to dictate the end. And as the wind blows over the village and the first rays of sunlight illuminate awakened faces, each spectator is reminded. True transformation lies not only in the visible miracle, it lies in the silent, profound change that occurs within those who choose to believe, trust, and act.